broadcasting from Global TV and Good People TV. Today's interview is going to be very, very intriguing as we join Adam Cox from London, United Kingdom. He is a self-made millionaire at the age of 27, launching a PR agency at 23 years old. He is a radio presenter on UK National Radio, host of 2 podcasts in the iTunes chart, Modern Mindset and Hypnotist, founder of phobiaguru.com, hypnoslimming.com. Addiction Experts and is the creator of Hypnotic Vault. And he has become well known as a hypnotherapist to celebrities, CEOs, and even royalty. His mission is to impact more than 1 million people through his hypnosis downloads. Adam Cox, I welcome you to my show.
It's a privilege to be here. Thank you so much.
So Adam, at what age did you develop this special interest in hypnosis?
I was fascinated by hypnosis fairly young. In my early teens, I had a real interest in psychology. So I was reading books on speed reading and mnemonics, which is this ability to kind of memorize things very, very quickly and effectively. I was interested in guided meditation and visualization. So for me, I had this huge interest in learning about how the mind works, but also I was a very shy, introverted child. So I was also very interested in things about confidence and self-esteem and personality traits and all these kind of things. And that led me to stumble across certain books and ideas about hypnosis and the unconscious mind. So it was in my teenage years that I first uncovered hypnosis, and that planted a seed in many ways that I revisited throughout my life. That I always had this feeling that the mind was capable of so much more than we realize, and that's really where that kind of passion and enthusiasm came from.
That's absolutely amazing. And the second question is, what is the difference between hypnosis and hypnotherapy?
For a lot of people, they will use hypnosis generally to mean hypnosis for entertainment. So a lot of people will have seen stage hypnotists, or they will have seen let's say performers, or different ways of doing hypnosis, and generally that's considered hypnosis. Hypnotherapy is using hypnosis specifically for the purpose of creating some kind of therapeutic outcome for the individual. So generally on stages it's there to entertain, and in a clinical practice it's there to create some kind of resolution to a problem, or help with a trauma, or resolve an addiction or a phobia. So hypnotherapy really is about helping people, whereas a lot of people will use hypnosis as a way of thinking about entertainment. I call myself the hypnotist for my podcast, really to bridge that gap, to let people know that actually hypnosis, it doesn't have to be thought of as hypnotherapy to actually help people improve their lives. So I try and be quite innovative in my hypnosis content that I create, so that people start to see hypnosis for what it really is, which is about change.
So basically we can think of hypnosis as a tool and hypnotherapy as the use of a tool. Hypnosis is...
So it's a very good summary of that. So hypnosis is the techniques, and hypnotherapy is specifically using that technique to create some kind of resolution to a problem.
Okay. And does hypnosis work on everyone?
Generally, it if you think about what hypnosis really is, which is accessing the unconscious mind. So to be human, you have to access your unconscious mind, because you don't think about when you blink, you don't think about every time you breathe. So many things you do completely automatic and unconsciously, and that is your unconscious mind making decisions for you. So everyone has an unconscious, everyone does things without thinking about it, but some people can be resistant to hypnosis, and that normally comes down to beliefs about what hypnosis is. And a lot of people have a belief that hypnosis is about control. So if people had a childhood where they had very controlling parents, or if they're in a relationship with a controlling partner, then they might fear working with a hypnotist because they believe that they could be controlled or manipulated. And that generally is the reason why people might be resistant to hypnosis. The second area relates to suggestibility. So some people are more willing and able to follow suggestions, and that's fairly evenly distributed, like in a normal distribution curve. So some people are highly suggestible and some people are highly resistant, but all people have the ability to be hypnotized if they trust the hypnotherapist and they really understand what hypnosis really is, rather than their fears about hypnosis.
So hypnosis is a willing state, and people differ on hypnotic ability, right? If we should be open to the experience, and we have to make that change. And as you say, the biggest misconception about hypnotherapy is that the hypnotherapist is in control. The hypnotherapist is in control of the client. However, that is not true, because the client has to be willing to make a change and get into the driving seat, as the client is always in control.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. You've got a good understanding of hypnosis. A lot of people don't. And in some countries there's cartoons, like in America and the UK there was a cartoon called Scooby-Doo, and quite often they would have a villain hypnotist that would put people under the spell and all this kind of thing, and you would see their eyes turn to spirals, and they were under the control of the hypnotist. So this is where these fears come from. Misunderstanding. Some movies, for example, the antagonist, the villain, will be a hypnotist, a Machiavellian type of character that's trying to manipulate or control. So that's where these fears come from. But it really has to be a partnership. In the same way that just because a teacher is teaching you something doesn't automatically mean that you learn. You have to want to learn whatever you're being taught, and the teacher has to be good enough, competent enough to deliver it in a way that becomes engaging. And that's no different from hypnosis. And sometimes people say, well, hypnosis works or hypnosis doesn't work because of one experience with a hypnotist. But that's like saying education doesn't work. Education works if you've got a good teacher and you've got a desire to learn. So it really is a partnership. It requires a good therapist, but also a willing practitioner.
I absolutely agree with what you just said. So are there hypnotic power words used to hypnotize?
Yeah, all words have, to some extent, an emotion attached to them. So there's words like power, for example, or free or secret. There are emotive words that we just have in our language. In particular, hypnotists tend to use words that are associated with a certain state. So probably the most popular and almost cliched one is sleep, which is interesting because hypnosis isn't actually sleep. It's kind of like this middle ground. You're not fully awake, but you're certainly not asleep. And yet hypnotists, including myself, will consistently use the word sleep or use the word relax. And they're important words. For me, the more important word is the word resourceful, because my belief is that every person has got access to incredible resources within them. They've had at least one time in their life where they were incredibly motivated or very determined or very persistent or very resilient. So for me, the word resourceful encapsulates all of those resources. So for me, I prefer to use the word resourceful rather than relaxed, because you don't need someone to be drowsy or sleepy in order to be having powerful hypnosis. Sometimes you want them to be quite concentrated or focused or alert. But resourceful, I think, is a really powerful word, because when you can activate someone's resources, they become able to do so much more. And the opposite of resourceful is helpless. And when people feel trapped, if people feel helpless, then they tend to make really bad decisions. And decisions like, well, I'll never succeed, so why even attempt? If they feel like they can't do something or they're helpless, that's a very unresourceful state. So for me, my job is to create changes where they feel highly resourceful, so they're in control of their own life and they get to steer their life in the kind of direction they want to take it.
And it's not just any old words, specific words and phrases to help people imagine possibilities. It's the way the words are used. And that's really the secret behind, making them hypnotic. Choice words, power words, stimulating the imagination, distracting the client. And activating your senses, each power word serves as its own purpose. However, power is increased when you all are combined. So Adam,
yeah, I was also going to say, in terms of the power words, also what you find is that the individual themselves has really emotive words or context. So for them, it might be that they really aspire to be impactful. And if you know that impactful is a word that's really powerful for them, then I would use that word when working with them. But someone else might, have motivation as their keyword. So I think it's really important to find out what words have that emotion from the individual, and then you're kind of mirroring them back because you already kind of know what's actually going to influence them in a positive way.
I'm going to try using those power words in my day-to-day.
Fantastic.
So Adam, you're about to launch an online course called Hypnosis. What has inspired you to go about this?
For me, my childhood, I had middle-class parents, so they weren't wealthy, but they weren't poor. And when I was in my early teens, my father decided to go back to university, which suddenly meant, and that was unusual at that time for, an adult with children to go back to school effectively. He made that choice, and I think it was a good choice for him. But what it meant is that the income in the house when I was a child suddenly went down. And that certainly affected my confidence. It affected my perceptions about myself. So for me, I had pain attached to not having money as a child. Not having the nice trainers or, having clothes that were kind of tatty. So for me, I had this huge desire to become wealthy and become responsible for my own financial destiny. So, and what happened for me is that when I was in my late teenage years, early 20s, I had severe anxiety, like so much anxiety that there was a period of about 9 months that I couldn't even leave the tiny, apartment that I was in because I was a recluse. I was scared of people. I had so much anxiety. So for me, learning about hypnosis and psychology and change enabled me to go from incredibly shy, anxious, introverted, and depressed effectively to being able to be very confident and motivated and have a different attitude to risk. And what that meant is that I, within a few years, going from absolutely nothing, enabled myself to launch a business, build a property portfolio, and then effectively also, invest the money that the business made into stocks and shares. So at the age of 27, I'd become a millionaire on paper. I certainly didn't have £1 million in my bank account, but assets less liabilities was over £1 million. And that, if you've got American audiences at the time, that would have been about $2 million at the age of 27. So from that perspective, I knew how to do it. And yet when friends or acquaintances would say, well, how did you buy so much property? Or, how did you, build a business that has, 25 staff, I think at the age of 27, 28, I would tell them exactly what I did, how to do it. And not one of them did anything with that information. And what it occurred to me is that we are in an age of information. We're in the information age. Knowledge has never been more accessible. But the idea that knowledge is enough, I think, is naive, because we are in a world where you can find anything you want on YouTube. You can get next day delivery on a book on Amazon. You can get whatever information and knowledge that you want. And yet, personal debt has never been higher. There are so many people in poverty. There are so many people working jobs that they hate. And yet, there's all this knowledge around. So for me, it was obvious that the reason why people don't have the level of personal wealth that they want has nothing to do with information, has nothing to do with knowledge, and it has everything to do with what's happening in their mind. So their fears, their beliefs, their insecurities, their attitude to risk. So for me, what I started doing is started to build up a bit of a map of those people that could become wealthy and what beliefs and approaches their mindset and their strategies they had that the average person didn't have, and then be able to deliver that in a way where it isn't just giving information, but actually guiding people through hypnosis sessions to fundamentally change how they think about money, change how they think about abundance. Most people have a scarcity mindset. They're always worried that there isn't enough opportunity. The reality is that there's too much opportunity. The biggest scarce resource for anyone is time. So creating this hypnosis sessions, and there's about more than 50 hypnosis sessions. So we're talking like 50 hours worth of hypnosis, 50 hours worth of content, specifically to change how people think and believe about money. Because my personal belief system when it comes to wealth is that anyone can become a multimillionaire. I also believe that it requires more than just knowing the right things and thinking the right things to be a billionaire. To be a billionaire, you need to have the right business in the right market, or you have to be fortunate to have inherited wealth. But to be a multimillionaire, I personally believe anyone could do that, but only if they change certain core beliefs and have a particular strategy that makes it possible for them. Because so many people have a self-fulfilling prophecy that because they believe that it's impossible for them, they're not even going to attempt to build a business. They won't attempt to acquire assets. They won't attempt to invest because of either ignorance or, more likely, fear. And fear really gets in the way of people becoming financially successful. So my goal really is to help people have sufficient wealth to be not just safe and secure, but, have the quality of life that they want. And that might be, having, a nice house, or it might be having the quality of lifestyle. It might be able to donate to charities. It might be to have luxury things like nice watches and cars and things. But whatever it is for them, for me, that's a resourceful state. And money is just one resource. And not even the most important resource, but it's still a very valuable resource, because anyone that's experienced poverty knows that without money, your choices are limited. And for me, that means people, again, make bad decisions when it comes from a place of scarcity and fear.
Yeah, this is so phenomenal. This helps dissolve any barriers keeping you from becoming rich and setting an inner blueprint. Clearing all blocks and limiting beliefs to become a magnet for success.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have fears about what it means to be rich or wealthy. They fear that they're going to lose their friendships or be judged or be pursued in terms of legal cases and things. And I think it comes from a place of ignorance, and it comes from a place of fear. There's some unpleasant people that are very rich, but equally there's some lovely people that are very rich. And I think for me, money simply amplifies the character of an individual. So if you've got a mean, nasty person that's poor, they have a certain element of impact in the world. If you've got someone very wealthy that's mean and unpleasant, well, because they're rich, they're gonna be amplify those qualities. But for me, I think there is a misconception that money corrupts people, or money makes people bad people, or causes problems. And for me, money fundamentally is about freedom of choice. You can't make a choice as to how to live your life if one of the key resources that you need is the financial resources to do that. So for me, I think it's about empowering people to be comfortable with money and knowing what it truly is.
I totally agree with you. So let's discuss a little on getting into better financial shape, and how can we set goals and stick to them?
Yeah, I think the first thing in terms of getting in financial shape, I would say most people are really bad at spending money. I'd say that's because the thing is, society has made it very, very desirable to have the latest thing. And I think social media has amplified that. So if you see people with expensive watches and expensive cars and amazing clothes and the latest trainers, that puts a lot of pressure on people to feel at some level inadequate if they didn't have those things. And that certainly was my experience as a teenager. I saw all my school friends with having nice bikes and nice trainers and nice clothes, and I didn't have that. So I get why there is this desire to spend money. The problem is that if you spend more money than you earn, so effectively living beyond your means, then either you have to increase your income or you're going to start accumulating debt. And when you accumulate debt, effectively, that is the laws of compounding working against you. If you have credit card debt, if you have personal loans, then effectively you're helping someone else become wealthy. If, however, you acquire assets and use debt to help you, so mortgage on investment properties, or for me, I utilize my student loan to invest in stocks and shares. If you utilize debt to buy assets that can increase in value, that becomes very valuable as a vehicle. I think most people spend money on things they don't need, and they treat things like credit card debt and personal loans as if it's their money. It isn't your money. You're borrowing that from someone else. So you have to pay that back. So I think the number one tip to get into better personal finance shape is to reduce your expenses and to start focusing on paying down debt if you have any, and starting to accumulate sufficient excess cash so that you can buy assets. And an asset could be something as simple as shares in a company. It could be property. It could be, and sometimes people think like a car is an asset. Unless that car is going to make you money, a car is an asset if you're an Uber driver. But if it's just a car parked in your drive, that's not an asset. It's taking money away from you. So I would say that's the easiest way to start getting the basic principles of wealth. Reduce your expenses, increase your income. I think so many people these days, and it's great to see, have multiple income streams. So for me, I run a PR company. I have a property portfolio. I have income from coaching work that I do, also as a clinical hypnotherapist. So I've got digital products. So I've got 7 or 8 income streams coming into me. My dad, on the other hand, and my mum, they had a single job, one source of income, which meant that if they lost that job, income goes down straight away. And again, that makes people very anxious about choices. That's why people do jobs that they hate, because if they don't have that source of income, then they can't pay their bills. And how do you make great decisions if you're doing something you don't want to do? So I would say reduce expenses, increase income, and have multiple sources of income. And then with that excess cash, start buying assets. And this is all much easier than you think, as long as you have the right mindset that when those assets grow, you become wealthier.
Your advice is spot on. It's about, establishing good habits. Having a goal as well as an overarching plan is one of the easiest ways, to control finances and reduce stress. So, as a result, you would know firsthand the power of beliefs and mindsets by influencing wealth abundance.
The power of beliefs is such an important thing, because the beliefs are the filter in which we see the world. So you can generally have beliefs that are neutral. So if I believe that, a chair is useful to sit on, that doesn't improve my life, but it doesn't detract from my life. So you get so many beliefs that are just neutral in terms of value. And then you have empowering beliefs. Empowering beliefs are beliefs that might not be true, but if you believe them, that helps you in some way in the world. So I believe that anyone can be a multimillionaire. I believe that anything that I don't know how to do, I can learn if I'm committed to learning it. So there's many things that when I started, I didn't know how to run a business. I didn't know how to find tenants for a property, but I just had this belief system that anything I don't know, I can learn. And that's an empowering belief. But sometimes people will have disempowering beliefs. And a disempowering belief is a belief that in some way limits your life. So if you believe that investing in the stock market is very risky, okay, you're unlikely to invest in the stock market. If you believe that, let's say, most businesses fail within the first few years, that even if that's true, if you believe that it's highly likely that if you create a business it's going to fail, then your natural behavior is going to be, even if you've got a fantastic idea, is probably to seek security in employment rather than the opportunity in a business. So you get beliefs that are empowering, and you get beliefs that are limiting or disempowering in some way. And most people don't know how to change their beliefs. They just, it's almost like they're robots, and whatever they happen to have in their head, the beliefs, that's how they're going to live their life. And sometimes they will change. Sometimes education can change your beliefs, sometimes personal experience, sometimes knowing someone. So if you knew someone that was very successful in business and they say, hey, look, it's not that risky if you do this and this, that might change a belief that you have. But generally speaking, most people have a belief about beliefs that they are challenging to change them. And for me, I don't look at it that way. I believe that beliefs are so easy to change. The key question is, what beliefs are useful to have and improve your life? I used to have, when I was a recluse and filled with anxiety, I had beliefs about people. I had beliefs that people are rude. People, are going to judge me harshly. People make me feel bad. I had all these beliefs about people. So guess what? I avoided people. That was a very limiting belief that I had now. Now I think that people are one of the most precious things that exist on the planet. Because if you were the richest man in the world, if you had more money than Bezos, but you were on an island, a desert island with no people, well, what does that $100 billion do for you if there isn't a single person to communicate with or connect with at some level? It's meaningless. So for me, people are precious, incredibly valuable, because that's who you can learn from. That's who you can kind of add value to. That's how, that's what gives life meaning. So the beliefs that you have about things hugely impact the quality of your life. And I prefer my life now that I believe that people are valuable and precious resources than when I was in my teenage years, thought, people are horrible. Depending on the belief you have is going to influence the experience you have of the world.
This is so fascinating about money mindset, it's the full set of beliefs which starts in our unconscious mind. So Adam, in that way, how do we reprogram our subconscious mind and when it comes to money?
I mean, it's always happening. This is the interesting thing. Your subconscious mind is picking up all the information. So sometimes it could just be an experience. So if, for example, you do something very nice for someone and then they treat you badly, you might create a belief in that moment. It might be that, you see, you might have a belief about dogs and say dogs are cute, and then one day a big dog comes along and tries to bark at you and bite you, and then suddenly you might have a belief, oh, dogs are dangerous. So your unconscious mind is changing every single day through your experiences. But there can be certain things that take place, and we can label them beliefs or habits or addictions or traumas or phobias. Some things get stuck. And at that point, even when you try and make a change, nothing changes. And then at that point, it makes sense to find a specialist. So, I think of my mind in the same way that I think about property, because I have properties. And that is that if I have a property and there is something broken, I'm going to try and fix it myself before I hire an electrician or a plumber or someone like that. I'm going to try and fix it. But if I can't fix it, I'm going to find someone that knows what they're doing, because I don't know everything about everything. And I would rather find a specialist. What most people do is that if they're experiencing a personal issue or anxiety, or they're feeling depressed, or they're addicted to something they don't want to be addicted to, or they've got recurring memories or compulsive thoughts, they'll try and fix it themselves. And then generally, if that doesn't work, they don't try and fix the problem. They try and numb the pain. They try and cope with the symptoms. And this is where alcohol addiction, drug addiction, even, other addictions, social media addiction, for example, can take place, because what they're trying to do is cope with the pain, cope with the problem that is there, not by getting to the root cause of it, but by treating the symptoms. A lot of people, you mentioned phobias before. Most people deal with phobias by avoiding the thing that makes them feel anxious. Well, that's a good coping strategy. But for me, for example, when I had a phobia of people, you can't avoid 7 billion people on the planet. That's not going to work. So that's when people start, trying to find ways to manage the anxiety. And that's why people get addicted to drugs and all kinds of things, because they're just trying to do the best they can with the resources they have. But if you find someone that knows what they're doing, then, if you get the weed out by the root, then you don't have to keep chopping the weeds down. You can get it from the real source of the problem. And that's what I aim to do with my clients, is to make a change at the deepest level so that the problem doesn't come back.
We have to adopt to empowering beliefs, embrace the beauty of uncertainty, visualize, and probably biohack the subconscious mind with binaural beats or something like that.
Binaural beats are great, and so is theta wave music, and I use these kind of things. As you know, I have a podcast called The Hypnotist, and I tend to is my voice, but then beneath that is things like binaural beats or theta wave music, because as humans we have mirror neurons. So people start, their brain taps into the frequency of the music, and then the words, if the words are empowering or effective in some way, that can create a change. So I would say my advice would be, if people want to change their unconscious, try it yourself first, and if you can't, find someone that can.
So moving forward, overcoming phobia or fear of needles, how can hypnosis allow you to relax around injections?
Yeah, so there's two different things there. One is a phobic reaction isn't just anxiety, and I think this is a misconception. A lot of people might be anxious about having an injection, and some of that anxiety is going to be very valid and very rational, because you might be worried about side effects, or the environment might make you feel tense because you're around lots of people that might be sick, or whatever it might be. A phobia is something much more severe. A phobia is where you have an unconscious high state of anxiety just by seeing or thinking about the thing. So generally, there's a couple of things that relate to injections. One is the fear of blood, hemophobia. So sometimes people feel if they're going to be injected, they might see blood, and that can make people faint and feel very drowsy. But for some people, it's the connection with some kind of bacteria or germ. So if we're talking about vaccines, which are very dominant in the news right now, a lot of people have seen articles about side effects. There is an anti-vaxxer movement where there is lots and lots of material, mainly on social media, about links to things like autism and clots and all these kind of things. Now, if you see those articles and at some level you have a belief that vaccines are dangerous, then that's going to create anxiety. But for people that have a phobia, that's kind of different. A phobia is where it's a severe reaction, not really based on the information. It's disproportionate. So the way that I work with phobics like that is I try and get them to the point of what's known as the initial sensitizing event. So the very first moment, and it might have been that they were a child and 1, 2 years old, and they had vaccines when they were a child, and it was a very traumatic experience. And perhaps that was the key thing that kind of caused it. So you can use things like regression, for example, that can lead to changing and taking the trauma out of that sensitizing event. And there's lots of other techniques as well that I use. NLP has something called stage dissociation, where you get people seeing themselves as if they're someone else, and then rewinding the whole experience and then having it as they want. So I know probably about 20 different techniques that help people to change a phobia. And prior to COVID, I would have a room of maybe 20, 30 arachnophobes, terrified of spiders, lifelong phobia. And then at the end of that, they've held a huge tarantula. We're talking like this big, like massive tarantulas. They've held house spiders, and they can't believe that in just a few hours, they've gone from having a lifelong phobia of spiders to doing something that even people that aren't afraid of spiders wouldn't do. And that's the level of change that can take place if you use the right techniques. And most people don't know. Most people don't know that you can eliminate a phobia in under an hour. Most people think that's an impossible thing, and I've done it hundreds and hundreds of times. So I know it's true, but the average person doesn't know it's true because they haven't seen it.
And then, oh, wow. Yeah, so there's good news for us who has these phobias. Neophobia has become so prevalent, and trypophobia can keep people away from, even getting the vaccine shots, as you mentioned. In essence, I do believe that a session or two of hypnotherapy can quickly resolve these fears, and these process targets, the unconscious, your imagination, and memory and the belief system to unravel this phobia. So overcoming the fear of sleep, somnophobia.
Yeah.
What do you say about that?
Yeah, so there are lots and lots of unusual phobias, and what I'm more interested in, rather than specific phobias, is the structure of all phobias. So generally speaking, all phobias come from two main sources, and that is either they are learned from parents. So it might be that if you were a child and you saw your parents screaming when they saw a mouse, or getting really anxious when they're on a plane, then you might develop the phobia that way. Or it might be from an initial sensitizing event. So generally that's how they come about. So if someone has a fear of sleep, there are many sleep disorders. One of them, the most common, being nightmares. So everyone, I think, has had at least one nightmare in their life. So if they've had this kind of really anxious reaction, and a severe form of a nightmare is called night terrors, which is just where the anxiety becomes very extreme. Or it might be that they've had, that there's lots of kind of hallucinations that people can have when they're in deep sleep. One of the popular ones is like a very old lady putting pressure on the chest, for example. Now, if you've had one of these experiences, and you know that they only happen when you sleep, that could create a fear of sleeping, because it's like, well, when I sleep, that's when these horrible things happen. Generally speaking, when people get anxious or scared, it's the unconscious trying to protect them. So when I work with people, it's about letting them know that their unconscious is trying to help, but in trying to help, it's making you feel horrible. So we're going to get your unconscious helping where you don't feel horrible. And then that, opens up the gateway to the possibility of a much more healthy relationship with the unconscious mind. Because in order for someone to feel high levels of anxiety, generally they make vivid pictures in their mind's eye of horrible things happening. They've got self-talk recurring, of bad things happening, or that you can't cope and that you're going to die and all this kind of stuff. I mean, I've worked with some very extreme phobics. There was a phobic client that I worked with that had a fear of death called thanatophobia, and he would consistently picture himself dead, like his body rotting in a grave, with voices in his head telling him that he's going to die soon. He's going to die. His children are going to be alone. He's going to die. He's going to be rotting in the ground. Now, that would be annoying if you just heard it for 1 or 2 minutes. But if you're hearing and you're seeing these graphic, gruesome images in your mind's eye for hours and hours and hours every day, life becomes unbearable, So for me, generally, I'm not the first person that people visit if they've got a problem. I'm the person they go to in extreme situations. So, if it's kind of like life is unbearable, there was a man I was working with recently. He has a fear of mice, and he didn't have an issue with it, but he's just bought a house and there are mice in the house, and that's a lot of money he's invested in that house. He can't just move, so he needs to then tackle the fear. So for me, it's always interesting. I find it fascinating with people's anxieties, because I had such severe anxiety myself. I know what it's like, and life is a very unpleasant place when you've got very high levels of anxiety. So I think that helps me become a better therapist, because I kind of know what they're going through.
Yeah, I guess in my end, somnophobia is something learned patterns of behavior, which has, become anchored into my unconscious mind.
Yeah, I mean, and that happens for everyone. The human mind can do very complex things completely automatic. Most people have driven without being aware they're driving a car. They know they're driving the car, but they're not aware of like changing lane and changing gear. The unconscious can do that. And if the unconscious mind can drive a car, it can definitely make people feel anxious very quickly. It can make people eat things when they're not hungry. It can make people do things completely out of context. It can influence their anger and their communication. So much is happening from the unconscious, and people are like, well, I don't want to do this, but why am I doing it? And that's because there's a conflict between the conscious and the unconscious mind. And my job is to get them working together rather than kind of battling. And that's, that's a big part of what I do, getting different parts of the unconscious collaborating.
Yeah, and we need to find out what is causing this and trying to remedy this fundamental cause. So, Adam, can hypnosis damage our brains?
Can it damage the brains? I don't think it can. I think there's a principle called neuroplasticity, and effectively, even when people have very traumatic events in their life, and we're talking body parts blown off in a war or a car crash, or even emotional things like a really severe breakup or a bereavement, or even rape and torture and horrible things, the mind has been proven time after time that it can be resilient and it can cope. So if people can cope with torture and war and car accidents, hypnosis, that's a very mild form of influence. So I would say the real answer to that question is that the average insurance for a doctor to practice is very high because of medical negligence. My insurance that I have for being a clinical hypnotherapist is very cheap. And I think that should give people a lot of confidence that if it was a dangerous thing to do, my insurance would be very expensive, and it isn't, so that should reassure people.
Yes, and it's also, depending on the idea absorbed, the person who tries it. So, where can people find you on social media?
Yeah, so there's a few places. On Facebook, if you look for Adam Cox or Hypnotist Adam Cox. On Instagram, official Adam Cox official, or where I'm most active is really on my podcasts. So on any of the podcast platforms like Spotify or iTunes or Apple Podcasts, if you look for either Adam Cox, because I have a podcast called Modern Mindset with Adam Cox, but my hypnosis podcast is called The Hypnotist. So if you look for The Hypnotist, you can hear there's currently more than 200 live hypnosis sessions there on that podcast. So if you're curious and you want to experience hypnosis with me, if you visit The Hypnotist, you can have 200 hypnosis sessions with me completely free, because it's just there on the podcast.
Great. So in closing, what is your ending message?
Yeah, I think for me, the most important message I'd want people to get from me is that the unconscious mind is very, very powerful. Humans are very resilient, and it's all about choice. And I think it's better to be in a position where you can make a choice rather than not have that choice. And if you think about people in certain parts of the world in poverty, maybe as a result of being trafficked, they don't have choice. So I think it's really important to be grateful for, if you're in a privileged position where you get to make choices, or you can increase your ability to make choices by becoming, changing your beliefs or increasing your financial wealth. That is a very, very valuable thing. And I think for me, there are so many millions and millions of people in the world that don't have choices. So tap into your human mind to make you have more choices and become more resourceful to do that. And then your quality of life will increase massively.
That's just amazing, Adam. Adam, we'd like to thank you so much for joining me today. It's really a pleasure having you here.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure, Geraldine. Thank you so much for the invite to your show.
As a hypnotist, you have a superpower, like, the ability to help other people overcome challenges, breaking habits, and, to become the better versions of themselves. You have added tremendous value in today's interview. So in a nutshell, the work you do is nothing short of inspiring. Thank you so much for today.
Thank you, Geraldine. Thank you.
And to all my viewers watching out there, till next time.